He sent for a wife by mail, and 3 women travelled from afar, only to turn on their heels and flee the same day they arrived, terrified by where he lived. But the 4th, when she stepped onto that porch, creaking over the abyss, didn't run. She stayed. Can you imagine the despair of a good man who watches, for the 3rd time, a bride step off the wagon full of hope, only to climb back on half an hour later with eyes wide in terror? He wasn't violent, he wasn't ugly, he wasn't poor. But his house sat in a place that made any outsider feel a cold shiver run down their spine. This story happened in the rugged foothills of the Colorado Rockies in March of 1912. On an isolated property 4 miles from the settlement of St. Sebastian's Ridge, where the wind cut through skin like a knife and the silence of the night was broken only by the sound of stones tumbling down into the canyon. Since you've made it this far, let me ask you a quick favor. Drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from, what city, state, or even what country you're in. I love knowing that these old stories reach so many different places. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, click that button, because every Sunday there's a new story of resilience, love, and emotion from the old days. Now, come with me, because this story will move you from beginning to end. Helen Vance was 28 years old when she picked up that newspaper. She was sitting in the tiny parlor she shared with 3 other women at Mrs. Constance's boarding house in Denver, a city growing too fast and showing no mercy to those who stumbled. The February afternoon drifted through the narrow window, bringing the smell of dust and coal smoke. Helen held the Rocky Mountain Gazette open to the classifieds, her slender fingers marking the thin paper already yellowed by the sun. Decent man, 34, established carpenter in the interior, seeks wife of good character for honest life and companionship. Send letter to Theodore Alder, St. Sebastian's Ridge, care of the local post office. It wasn't the prettiest advertisement. It promised neither wealth nor comfort, but it possessed a naked honesty that touched something inside her. Helen read it 3 times before folding the paper. She thought about the word companionship, not love, not passion, not family. Companionship, as if the man knew that life had already stripped him of any fairy tale illusions and he just wanted someone to share the weight of the days. She knew that weight well. 6 months prior, Helen Vance had been a respected teacher at the St. Lucy's School for Girls, where she taught reading and writing to the daughters of middle-class families. She earned little, but enough to rent a decent room and buy fabric for 2 dresses a year. She had students who adored her. She had a routine. She had dignity. Until Clarice Ambers, the mother of a mediocre student, decided her daughter deserved better grades and that Helen was favoring the girls from wealthier families. The accusation was ridiculous. Anyone with eyes could see Helen treated every student with the same firm patience. But Clarice Ambers was the sister-in-law of the school board director and had a sharp tongue. She spread it all over town that Helen Vance was selling grades, accepting gifts from rich families, that she was dishonest and grasping. None of it was true. None of it mattered. The director, a weak man who feared his sister-in-law more than his own conscience, called Helen in one August afternoon and said in a limp voice that it would be better if she resigned voluntarily to avoid a larger scandal. Helen felt the floor vanish beneath her feet. She asked to defend herself, asked for an investigation, asked for justice. He averted his eyes and repeated that it would be better this way, for everyone. Helen left that school with her cloth bag slung over her shoulder and her eyes dry, burned out from the inside. She tried to find another position, sent letters to 5 different schools. None replied. The story had already traveled. No one wanted a teacher with a stained reputation, even if the stain was a lie. Without a job, Helen burned through her savings in 3 months. She sold her 2 good dresses, keeping only the mended work ones, moved from her comfortable home to that boarding house where 6 women shared a bathroom and a kitchen. Everyone there had similar stories. Women without family, without husbands, without luck. Women the city spat out to the margins. Helen truly had no family. She was the only child of parents who died of yellow fever when she was 14. She was raised by 2 spinster aunts who taught her to read, write, embroider and behave. The aunts died too, one of a stroke and the other of grief, before Helen turned 20. She was left alone in the world, holding on to her profession as a teacher like a life raft. And now she didn't even have that. That February afternoon, with the newspaper in hand and her stomach aching from hunger because she'd skipped lunch to save money, Helen made a decision that would change everything. She borrowed paper, a nib and ink from Mrs. Constance and wrote a short, honest letter. Mr. Theodore Alder, my name is Helen Vance. I'm 28 years old and was a teacher in Denver. I lost my position due to a false accusation and have no family or prospects here. I can read, write, cook, and keep house. I'm not beautiful, but I'm healthy and hard-working. If you are still looking for a wife, I accept the chance to meet you. Respectfully, Helen Vance. She mailed the letter the next day and tried not to build expectations. 2 weeks passed. 3. Helen had almost forgotten about it when, one March morning, Mrs. Constance knocked on her door with an envelope in hand. "An answer came for you," the woman said, with barely disguised curiosity. Helen opened the letter with trembling fingers. The handwriting was firm, slanted, belonging to a man used to drafting blueprints. "Miss Helen, I thank you for your letter. I have no family either. I also know what it is to be judged wrongly. If you accept, I am sending money for a train ticket to Colorado Springs and the stagecoach to St. Sebastian's Ridge. Let me know the date, and I will be waiting. Cordially, Theodore Alder." Inside the envelope were $50 in folded bills. It was enough for the fare, with plenty left over for a new outfit if she wanted. Helen held the bills carefully, as if they were made of glass. In that moment, she didn't feel love. She felt relief. She felt that perhaps she wouldn't starve in a forgotten boarding house in Denver. She felt that someone, somewhere, had given her a second chance. She wrote back setting the date. 2 weeks later, on a cold autumn morning that arrived early in the high country, Helen Vance boarded the train with a battered leather suitcase that had belonged to her aunts and a heart full of mixed fear and hope. The train ride to the Springs lasted 7 hours. Helen spent the time looking out the dusty window, watching the plains roll into foothills, the red rock formations rising like church towers, the cornfields scorched by the sun. She thought of Theodore Alder, tried to imagine his face. Would he be tall, gentle, a man of his word? At the station, she found the wagon driver Theodore had promised to send. He was a thin man with a drooping mustache who greeted her by tipping his hat. "You're Mr. Theo's bride?" he asked, more as a confirmation than a question. Helen nodded, and he took her suitcase carefully. She climbed onto the buckboard beside him, and the wagon rattled off down the dirt road. The driver wasn't talkative, but he wasn't rude. After an hour of silence, Helen gathered her courage and asked how much farther. He scratched his beard before answering that it was another 4 hours. She swallowed hard and asked what St. Sebastian's Ridge was like. The man gave a short, humorless laugh. "Small town," he said. "Good folks but suspicious. Sits at the foot of the range. Beautiful place if you like the woods and silence." Helen wanted to ask about Theodore but didn't know how. The driver seemed to read her thoughts because he spoke without her asking. "Mr. Theo is a decent man, works hard, pays on time, doesn't trouble anyone, been living alone a long time. You're the 4th one to come." Helen felt her stomach freeze. "The 4th," she repeated slowly. The driver realized he had said too much and fell quiet, but Helen insisted. "What happened to the other 3?" she asked, her voice steady despite her fear. The man sighed deeply and decided she deserved to know. They came, saw the house, and left the same day. All three. The last one left crying, said she couldn't sleep in a place like that for all the money in the world. Helen's heart beat faster. "What kind of place?" she asked. The driver looked at her sideways. "Mr. Theo's house sits on the edge of a drop-off," he explained slowly. "There's a deep canyon right behind it. The wind hits hard, the house creaks, and there's a sad story behind it, but it ain't my place to tell. You'll see when you get there." Helen spent the rest of the trip in a silence filled with thoughts. She thought about turning back, thought about asking the driver to turn the wagon around, but then she remembered Mrs. Constance's boarding house, the pitying looks of the other women, the hunger that gnawed at the end of the month, Theodore's letter that had been respectful and honest. She decided she wouldn't run before seeing it with her own eyes. The sun was starting to dip when the wagon entered the settlement of St. Sebastian's Ridge. It was smaller than Helen imagined. A main dirt street, about 20 buildings of timber and stone, a small church with a single steeple, a general store with a porch where men played checkers. The driver waved to some people who looked at Helen with curiosity. "Theo's new bride," shouted a toothless old man sitting on the porch. "God bless her, she'll need it." The wagon didn't stop in town. It continued up a road that climbed the hill, getting narrower, surrounded by thicker woods. The afternoon cooled rapidly. Helen pulled her shawl over her shoulders. She smelled damp earth, rotting leaves, something she couldn't identify. The driver guided the mules with a steady hand, but Helen noticed tension in his shoulders. After nearly an hour of climbing, the road turned a sharp corner and suddenly opened into a clearing. Helen saw the house and understood everything. The house was made of timber and stone, a solid, well-built construction with a porch out front and a red shingle roof. But it stood less than 60 feet from the edge of a gorge. Helen could see the abyss from the wagon. She couldn't see the bottom. Only grey rocks descending vertically and vanishing into shadow. The wind rising from down below brought a constant sound, like a deep, heavy breath. The house sat sideways to the precipice, as if trying not to look directly at it. But the proximity was terrifying. Helen imagined waking up at night, imagined sleepwalking, imagined a spooked mule running in the wrong direction. She felt vertigo just thinking about it. The driver stopped the wagon and climbed down slowly. Helen remained seated, gripping the edge of the bench. She couldn't take her eyes off the gorge. The man took her suitcase and set it on the ground. "Want me to wait?" he asked in a low voice. Helen didn't answer immediately. Part of her screamed to say yes, "Wait, I'm going back with you." But then the house door opened. Theodore Alder stepped out onto the porch, wiping his hands on a rag. He was tall, with the broad shoulders of a man who worked with heavy timber, dark hair cut short, beard trimmed with care. He wore denim trousers and a linen shirt with sleeves rolled up to the elbows. He had an angular face, sharp cheekbones, deep-set eyes. He wasn't handsome in the common sense, but there was something about him that drew attention, a stillness, a solidity. He descended the 3 porch steps slowly, as if afraid of startling a skittish animal. He stopped about 15 feet from the wagon and took off the straw hat he was wearing. "Miss Helen," he said in a grave, measured voice, "welcome." Helen forced her legs to move. She climbed down from the wagon, grabbing the side so she wouldn't fall because she was dizzy. She stepped onto the packed dirt and stood there, not knowing what to do with her hands. "Thank you, Mr. Alder," she managed to say. Her voice came out hoarse. Theodore looked at her as if memorizing every detail. Helen was too thin, she knew that. Her traveling dress was faded and mended at the right cuff. Her brown hair, pinned in a low bun, had loose strands escaping because of the wind on the journey. She wasn't a woman who turned heads on a busy street. But she had clear, intelligent eyes, and there was dignity in the way she held her head high, despite her visible fear. Theodore turned to the driver and paid the agreed amount. The man thanked him, wished them both luck, and climbed back onto the wagon. Before leaving, he looked at Helen one more time. "If you need anything, send word to town," he said. Helen nodded. The wagon turned and disappeared around the bend in the road. Silence fell between them. Only the wind rising from the gorge filled the space. Theodore picked up Helen's suitcase. "It's light," he said, surprised. She replied that she didn't have many things. He nodded, as if he understood exactly what that meant. "I'll show you the house," Theodore said. Helen followed him to the porch. The boards creaked beneath her feet. It wasn't the creak of rotten wood. It was the sound of new wood under pressure. But it was a constant, unsettling noise. With every step, the floor complained. Theodore opened the door and let Helen enter first. Inside, the house was simple but well kept. A sitting room with a solid wood table, handmade chairs, a cast-iron wood stove in the corner that served as the kitchen. The smell of sawdust and linseed oil. Everything clean, everything organized, but cold. The cold of a place where a person resides but does not live. "There are 2 bedrooms," Theodore explained, pointing to 2 doors. "One is mine. The other can be yours until we marry properly in the church. Father William comes every 2 weeks. He arrives next week. If you want to wait until then, no problem." Helen looked at him in surprise. Theodore continued without meeting her eyes. "I know you came from far away and don't know me. I won't force anything. Marriage is for life and requires respect. You can decide if you stay or go. No one will judge you." In that moment, Helen realized 2 things. First, Theodore Alder was a man of honor. Second, he was just as scared as she was. "Thank you," Helen said, her voice firmer. "I will stay until I know you better." Theodore nodded, and something like relief passed over his face. He showed her the room that would be hers. It was small, with a single bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a dark wood dresser, and a window that looked out to the side of the house, not the abyss. Helen put her suitcase on the bed. "I'll make coffee," Theodore said. "You must be hungry." Helen realized she was starving. She'd eaten only hard bread on the train. She followed Theodore back to the main room and sat in one of the chairs while he busied himself at the stove. She watched his hands. Large hands, calloused, with small scars from chisels and adzes, hands that knew how to make things. Theodore brewed strong coffee in a metal pot, cut thick slices of cornbread, fried pork sausage in lard. He put everything on the table without ceremony. "Eat while it's hot," he said. Helen ate slowly at first, then faster because the food was good, and she didn't know when she'd last had a real meal. Theodore ate in silence, looking at his own mug. After cleaning the plates in the basin of water, Helen gathered the courage to ask what had been stuck in her throat since she arrived. "Why is the house so close to the drop?" she asked. Theodore remained motionless for a long time. Helen thought he wasn't going to answer, but then he sat down again, rested his elbows on the table, and interlaced his fingers. "Because I am stubborn and a fool," he said, his voice void of emotion. "This property was mine. I had another house here, about 50 feet further forward. It was a good house. I lived with my wife and my little daughter. That was 8 years ago." Helen held her breath. Theodore continued. "In April of 1904, it rained for 3 weeks straight. The ground got soaked. I was in town working on a big order. When I came back at night, half the land had slid away. The house had gone with it. I found my wife and daughter the next day, buried under earth and stone." The silence that followed was heavy as a boulder. Helen felt tears burning her eyes, but didn't let them fall. "I am so sorry," she whispered. Theodore nodded slowly. "The folks in town told me to abandon the place. Said it was dangerous, that it could slide again, that it was cursed, but I didn't want to go. I built this new house on what was left of the land, further back, where the rock is solid. I hired a foreman from Colorado Springs to ensure the foundation was firm. The house won't fall, but it sits near the gorge, and the wind comes up from down there and makes noise, and people are afraid." Helen understood everything. She understood why 3 women had run away, understood why Theodore lived alone, understood the pain he carried like a weight on his back, and understood that this man wasn't looking for love. He was looking for someone who wouldn't leave him. Night fell quickly. Theodore lit a kerosene lantern that cast a yellow light in the room. Helen helped wash the dishes. They worked side by side in a silence that wasn't uncomfortable. When they finished, Theodore said he was going to sleep early because he woke with the sun. "If you need anything during the night, my room is there," he pointed. "You can knock." Helen thanked him and went to her own room. She closed the door, sat on the bed, and finally let her body tremble. She was afraid. Afraid of the gorge, afraid of the creaking house, afraid of the sad story that lived in the walls. But there was something else too. She felt pity for Theodore. She respected his stubbornness, and she had a strange curiosity to know who the man behind the pain was. She changed her clothes, blew out the candle, and lay down. The bed was hard but clean. The sheets smelled of lye soap. The wind rose from the gorge, bringing a constant sound that sounded like a moan. The house creaked now and then, adjusting to the cold of the night. Helen closed her eyes and tried to sleep. She woke in the middle of the night to a different sound. It wasn't the wind. It was muffled weeping coming from the other room. Helen lay motionless, heart pounding. The weeping continued. It wasn't loud. It was the sound of a man who didn't want to be heard, the sound of ancient pain that had no cure. Helen stayed awake until the weeping stopped. Only then did she manage to sleep again, with the strange sensation that she had stepped into a story much larger than she imagined. Helen woke with the grey light of dawn entering through the crack in the window. It took a few seconds to remember where she was. The smell of sawdust, the low creak of the house responding to the wind, the distant sound of water running somewhere down below in the canyon. It all came back at once. The journey, Theodore, the house on the edge of the abyss, the stifled crying she heard the night before. She sat up in bed and rubbed her face with her hands. The room was cold. She pulled her shawl over her nightgown and went to the window. She opened the thin, faded calico curtains and looked out. The view took her breath away. She couldn't see the gorge from that side of the house, but she saw the mountain range extending in waves of green and brown as far as the eye could see. The sky was clear, pearlescent, and the sun was beginning to gild the tops of the tallest pines. She heard a noise coming from the main room. Theodore was already awake. Helen dressed quickly in her navy blue work dress with invisible patches on the sleeves. She pinned her hair in a tight bun, washed her face in the basin of cold water in the room, and went out. Theodore was at the stove making coffee. He turned his head when he heard her arrive. "Morning," he said, with the hoarse voice of someone speaking their first words of the day. Helen replied, "Good morning," and stood there, not knowing where to put herself. Theodore pointed to the table. "Sit. It's ready." He served strong black coffee, cornbread, and molasses. They ate in silence. Helen noticed Theodore had deep circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept well either. She thought of the crying she heard, but said nothing. Some pains were too big to speak of at breakfast. When he finished, Theodore pushed his chair back and stood up. "I'm going to work in the shop," he said. "It's out back. If you need me, just holler." Helen nodded. He took his hat, hanging from a nail near the door, and left. She heard his boots thumping on the porch wood, then his steps fading away. She was alone. She looked around, trying to decide what to do. The house was clean, but had that feeling of a place where no one cared about details. Everything functional, nothing welcoming. Helen decided that if she was going to stay there, even if just for a few days, she needed to feel useful. She started by washing the breakfast dishes. Then she swept the wide plank floor, found a rag and soap, and scrubbed the table, the chairs, the windowsill, shook out the bed quilts, opened the windows to let the air circulate, even with the cold wind entering, bringing the smell of dirt and woods. She was finishing when she heard a rhythmic sound coming from the back, wood being sawed, precise hammer blows. Helen felt curious, put on her shawl and went out the back door. The workshop was a separate building, about 20 yards from the house, with open walls at the top for ventilation. Helen approached slowly. Theodore was bent over a wide workbench, working on a piece of wood that looked like a chair leg. He wore a leather apron over his shirt. The muscles of his forearms moved as he adjusted the plane. Golden sawdust fell to the floor like fine rain. He sensed her presence and stopped. Helen stood in the entrance without going in. "Sorry to bother you," she said. "Just wanted to know if you eat lunch at home." Theodore wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. "I do, noon or thereabouts. There are supplies in the pantry. Can you cook?" Helen said yes. Theodore went back to work. She stood there a moment longer, watching. There was something mesmerizing about the way he worked. Sure movements, deep knowledge of the material in his hands. The wood reacted to his tools as if it wanted to become what he planned. She went back to the house and explored the pantry, found a sack of rice, beans, smoked bacon, hanging onions, garlic, dried peppers, coarse salt. There were chickens in the yard. Helen gathered eggs from the makeshift nest under the porch. The hens clucked irritably, but didn't peck. She cooked rice with garlic and salt, stewed beans with bacon, and scrambled eggs with wild herbs she found in an abandoned patch beside the house. When the sun was high, she went out and called Theodore. He came wiping his hands on his apron, the smell of fresh wood clinging to him. They sat down to lunch. Theodore ate slowly, chewing well, like a man learning to appreciate home-cooked food after years of eating alone. At the end, he pushed the empty plate away and looked at Helen for the first time with something that wasn't just politeness. "It was good," he said. "Been a long time since I ate food made with care." Helen felt a strange warmth in her chest. "Thank you." "Die." Theodore stayed there a moment longer, as if he wanted to say something else, but didn't. He got up and went back to the shop. The days began to follow a rhythm. Helen woke early, made coffee, tended the house. Theodore worked in the shop until the light faded. They ate together in a silence that became less uncomfortable with every meal. At night, Theodore sometimes stayed on the porch, smoking a hand-rolled cigarette, looking into nothingness. Helen stayed inside, mending his clothes she found torn, or just sitting near the lantern with a book she had brought from the city. One night, 5 days after she arrived, Theodore came in and saw her reading. He stood in the doorway. "What are you reading?" he asked. Helen showed the cover. A book of poetry. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Theodore looked like he didn't know it. Helen asked if he liked to read. He gave a short laugh without humor. "Barely know how to read right," he confessed. "Learned the basics, but never had the knack. My business has always been working with my hands." Helen closed the book. "I can read aloud, if you like." Theodore hesitated. "I don't want to bother you." Helen shook her head. "It's no bother. I like reading to someone." Theodore sat in the chair on the other side of the table. Helen opened the book and began to read. Poetry about freedom, about love, about suffering. Her voice was clear and steady, used to teaching children, but had a softness when she pronounced the verses. Theodore sat motionless, listening, eyes fixed on the lantern, but she knew he was paying attention. When she finished the poem, Theodore was quiet. Then he said quietly, "It's beautiful. There's hope in those words." Helen agreed. "Sometimes that's all we have," she said. "Hope that things can get better." Theodore looked at her then, really looked. "And you still have hope?" he asked. After losing your job, your reputation, having to come to a forgotten place to marry a stranger. Helen held his gaze. I do. Because giving up is dying before your time. And I'm not ready to die yet. Something changed in Theodore's face. It wasn't a smile, but it was less weight. Neither am I, he said. So I guess we have that in common. That night, Helen didn't hear crying coming from his room. The next week brought more changes. Helen started planting herbs in the abandoned garden bed, fixed a hole in the chicken coop roof, washed all the linens, and hung them on the makeshift clothesline. Theodore noticed. He didn't speak much, but Helen saw it in the small gestures. He brought good soil from the creek bank for her garden, fixed the kitchen chair that wobbled, left wildflowers on the table one morning, saying nothing, just tiny yellow flowers that grew near the woods. Helen picked up the flowers and felt something tighten in her chest. It was a simple gesture, but coming from a man who had lived in his own pain for years, it meant the world. If you are liking this story, leave a like down there to help me out. It makes all the difference. On the 10th day, Helen was hanging laundry when she heard the sound of a wagon arriving. She stopped with the sheet in her hands and saw an old wagon pulled by a mule coming up the road. A sturdy woman of about 60 was driving, dark dress and a kerchief on her head. She stopped in front of the house and climbed down with surprising agility for her age. "You must be Helen," the woman said with a strong voice. "I'm Mrs. Euler. I own the general store in town. I came to meet the brave woman who stayed." Helen wiped her hands on her apron and went to greet her. Mrs. Euler had a sun-weathered face, small sharp eyes, a wide smile. "Brought some things," she said, opening a cloth bag. "Fresh flour, guava jam, and this cloth here I thought would look pretty on you. I won't take no for an answer." Helen was speechless. Mrs. Euler laughed. "You can stand with your mouth open later. Now show me this house everyone is afraid of." They went in together. Mrs. Euler looked at everything with critical eyes, but not with fear. "Good house," she said. "Theodore knows how to build. Shame folks are superstitious." Helen offered coffee. They sat at the table and Mrs. Euler began to talk. Spoke of the town, the families, who was who. Spoke of knowing Theodore since he arrived there more than 10 years ago, newly married, full of plans. Spoke of the accident with genuine sadness, but without melodrama. "His mistake was building here again," said Mrs. Euler. "Not an engineering mistake, a mistake of the head. He stayed trapped in grief. Thinks if he leaves, he'll be betraying Amelia and little Lily's memory. But life is for the living. I hope you help him understand that." Helen asked quietly why Mrs. Euler was being so kind to her. The older woman held Helen's hand firmly. "Because I also know what it is to be judged wrongly, because this world is hard enough and we need to help each other. And because I saw Theodore's face when he said you stayed. For the first time in years, that man had hope in his eyes." Mrs. Euler left after an hour, but before going made Helen promise she would come to town at least once a week. "Have to show yourself," she said. "Let folks see you're good people. The more you hide up here, the more stories they'll invent." Helen promised. She stood watching the wagon go down the road, feeling a warm gratitude spread through her body. She had made a friend, a small thing, but it meant a world of difference. That night, she told Theodore about the visit. He nodded. "Mrs. Euler is a good person, one of the few who didn't turn her back on me." He hesitated and then continued, "If you want to see the town, I'll take you tomorrow. Need to deliver some chairs the church ordered." Helen accepted. The next day, they climbed onto Theodore's wagon early. It was the first time Helen had gone down that road since she arrived. The morning was clear, cold air, but no wind. Theodore drove in silence, but Helen noticed he glanced at her now and then, as if wanting to make sure she was all right. When they entered the town, some people stopped to look. Theodore stopped the wagon in front of the church. Father William was sweeping the entrance. He was a young man, couldn't be more than 30, tall and thin, his cassock mended but clean. "Theodore, my son," he greeted with a warm smile, "and this must be Miss Helen. You are very welcome." Helen liked him immediately. The priest helped Theodore unload the chairs, praised the work, paid the agreed amount. Then invited Helen to see the church. It was small but well kept. Smell of incense and candle wax. Father William showed the pews, the simple altar, the image of Our Lady of Sorrows. They talked about life in town, about the school that had no teacher since the last one married and moved to Denver. The priest's eyes shone. "You were a teacher, weren't you?" Helen confirmed. He clasped his hands. "It is a sign from God. The children here need so much to learn." Helen felt something stir inside her. Possibility, purpose. Said she would think about it. The priest blessed them both, and they left. They went to Mrs. Euler's store. The woman received Helen like a queen, introduced her to everyone there. Some people were polite, others remained distant. Helen heard whispers. "Poor thing, doesn't know what she got into, won't last a month." But she didn't care. She was used to judgment. They were leaving the store when a tall man mounted on a chestnut horse stopped in front of them. He wore fine clothes, a tooled leather hat, boots with silver spurs. He was 40-something, full face, trimmed moustache, the expression of someone used to giving orders. "Theodore," he called with a voice that tried to be friendly but had something false underneath. "Heard you finally got a wife who stayed. Congratulations." Theodore went tense. Helen felt it. "Thank you, Alaric," Theodore replied with a neutral voice. Alaric Drummond looked at Helen with eyes that evaluated, measured, weighed. "So, miss, enjoying the house on the cliff, not afraid of falling in the night?" Helen lifted her chin. "The house is solid and well built. I have no fear." Alaric laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. "Brave or reckless? Don't know which is worse." He looked at Theodore. "My offer stands, Theodore. $2,000 for the property, more than it's worth. With that money, you can buy better land, far from tragedy. Start a new life with your new wife." Theodore clenched his fists. "Already told you I'm not selling. The land is mine, and I'll die on it." Alaric sighed as if he pitied him. "Stubbornness will be the end of you. And now it'll be the end of her too. If you care about this woman, get her out of that place before another tragedy happens." He spurred his horse and rode off without waiting for an answer. Helen looked at Theodore. He was pale, jaw locked. "Let's go," he said with a hoarse voice. They returned in silence. The trip back seemed longer. When they arrived, Theodore got down from the wagon too fast, almost stumbling, went straight to the workshop without saying anything. Helen stood there holding the bundle of groceries she'd bought at the store, feeling a strange weight in her chest. She went inside, put the things away, started making lunch, but her head was far away, thinking about Alaric, thinking about his offer. $2,000 was a fortune. A new life far from here. Why didn't Theodore accept? After lunch, which Theodore ate in complete silence, Helen couldn't take it, asked directly, "Why don't you sell the land to Alaric?" Theodore raised his eyes slowly. "Because he doesn't want the land. He wants access to the creek that runs here. It has clean water all year round. He wants to divert it to irrigate his crops. If I sell, he dries up the creek, and everyone who lives downstream goes without water. 3 families depend on that water. I won't be responsible for that." Helen felt ashamed for doubting. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't know." Theodore shook his head. "Nobody knows. Alaric is smart. Says he wants to help me, but what he wants is the creek. And he'll keep pushing until I give up or die." He looked at Helen with something dangerously close to despair. "That's why I understand if you want to leave. It's not an easy life here. And there are powerful people wanting me out." Helen was quiet for a long time. Then she spoke slowly, choosing her words. I lost my position because a powerful person decided I was in her way. I could have fought, but I gave up. I ran. I came here because I had no other choice." She looked into his eyes. "But now I understand something. Sometimes we have to stay and fight, not for pride, but because it's right. And I didn't come all this way to run again." Theodore went motionless. His expression changed. It wasn't just relief. It was something bigger. It was recognition, as if he was seeing Helen for the first time for real. "You are a rare woman, Helen Vance," he said, his voice low and rough. "I don't deserve your loyalty, but I thank you from my heart." Helen felt heat rise to her cheeks. It wasn't just gratitude she saw in his eyes. It was the beginning of something else, something that frightened and warmed her at the same time. The following days were different. Theodore started talking more, told her about his work, about the orders he had, about plans to expand the shop. Helen told him about her years teaching, about the students she had loved, about the pain of being accused unjustly. They talked at night near the lantern. Sometimes Helen read. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence. One afternoon, Theodore came back from the shop early. Helen was in the yard trying to fix the chicken coop fence. He approached. "Let me do that," he said. Helen protested, saying she could manage. Theodore smiled slightly, the first true smile she saw on him. "I know you can, but it'll be better if we do it together." They worked side by side. Theodore held the boards, Helen hammered the nails. He taught her the right way to strike so as not to bend them. Their hands touched when they reached for the hammer at the same time. Both froze. Theodore didn't pull his hand away immediately, stayed there, his calloused skin touching her fine fingers. Time stretched. "Sorry," he said finally, pulling his hand back. Helen missed the touch immediately. "No need to apologize," she replied, her voice lower than she intended. They finished the fence in a silence loaded with unspoken things. That night after dinner, Theodore didn't go to the workshop as he always did. He stayed inside. Helen was washing dishes when he approached. "Can I help dry?" he asked. Helen nodded. They worked together. Helen washed, passed the wet plates. Theodore dried with a mended dish towel. His arm brushed hers now and then. Every touch was a spark. When they finished, Theodore didn't move away immediately, stood beside her. "Helen," he said slowly. She turned her head to look at him. They were very close. She could see the grey hairs starting at his temples, the small wrinkles at the corners of his eyes, the thin scar above his left eyebrow. "I wanted to thank you," Theodore continued, "for staying, for not running away, for making me feel that maybe I'm not completely alone in the world." Helen felt her heart beat faster. "You aren't alone, and neither am I anymore." She hesitated and then put her hand on his arm, felt the muscles tense under the cotton shirt. "We are together now." Theodore looked at her hand on his arm as if it were treasure, covered her hand with his. His large, rough fingers wrapped around hers with care, as if she were made of porcelain. They stayed like that for a long moment. Neither moved, neither wanted the moment to end. It was Helen who pulled her hand away first, face hot. "It's getting late," she said. Theodore agreed with a hoarse voice. "Good night, Helen." It was the first time he spoke her name without "Miss" in front. "Good night, Theodore," she replied. Lying in bed later, Helen stayed awake looking at the ceiling. Thought about Theodore's hands holding hers, thought about the way he had looked at her, thought about how, in 2 weeks, that silent man had started to take up more and more space in her thoughts. It wasn't love yet, but it was a beginning. It was possibility. And for the first time in a long while, Helen didn't fear the future. The next morning brought a change in the air. Helen woke feeling a different weight in the atmosphere. The sky was grey, low, heavy clouds accumulating over the mountains. The wind had changed direction, now coming from above instead of rising from the gorge, bringing the smell of distant rain and wet earth. Theodore was already in the kitchen when she came out of her room. He was looking out the window with a worried expression. "Morning," Helen said. He turned and his face softened, seeing her. "Morning. Going to rain hard today. Spring storm. The worst kind." Helen approached the window. The distant trees were already swaying with the force of the coming wind. "Is there danger?" she asked. Theodore hesitated before answering. "For the house, no. The foundation is solid. But the canyon gets dangerous. Rocks can loosen. And the noise gets loud." They made coffee in silence. Theodore ate quickly and stood up. "I'm going to check everything before the rain hits. Close the workshop windows. Tie down anything that can blow away. You stay inside when it starts, hear?" Helen promised she would. She spent the morning preparing food, closing the house windows tight, placing buckets in the spots where the roof dripped during heavy rain. Theodore had shown her these spots days before. The house was good, but it was 8 years old and time took its toll. The first drop fell near noon. Thick, heavy, it hit the roof like a stone. Then came another, and then the sky opened. Rain fell with a violence Helen had never seen. Curtains of water so dense she couldn't see the workshop out back. The wind howled, battering the walls. The house creaked louder than usual, timber groaning under pressure. And from the gorge came a sound that made the blood freeze. A deep, hollow echo, as if the earth were screaming. Theodore came in soaked, water streaming from his hat and clothes. He took off his boots at the entrance so as not to wet the floor. Helen brought a towel. He dried his face and neck but remained tense, ears tuned to the sounds of the storm. They ate lunch with the deafening noise of rain all around. Lightning tore the greyish sky. Thunder shook the windows. At every loud crack, Helen flinched. Theodore noticed. "You scared of lightning?" he asked. Helen admitted yes, since she was a child. Theodore reached his hand across the table. "You can hold on if it helps," he said simply. Helen looked at his large, calloused hand, didn't think much, just put her hand in his. Theodore's fingers closed around hers, firm and warm. They stayed like that, hands interlaced on the table, while the storm raged outside. The afternoon was long. The rain didn't let up. The wind blew harder and harder. Theodore let go of Helen's hand eventually, but stayed inside with her, a rare thing. He kept pacing to the window. Looking out with worry, he tried to hide but couldn't completely. Helen tried to read but couldn't concentrate. The noise was constant and oppressive, and there was something else, a tension coming from Theodore she felt, but didn't fully understand. He was afraid, not of lightning, of something deeper. When night began to fall, the rain had lessened a bit, but the wind continued furious. Theodore lit the lantern earlier than normal. The yellow light threw dancing shadows on the walls. Helen prepared a simple dinner. Bean soup with bacon and cornbread warmed on the stove. They were eating when they heard it, a different sound, not wind, not rain, a dull rumble coming from the direction of the gorge. The house trembled slightly. The plates on the table rattled. Theodore went white. Stood up so fast his chair fell backward, stood still listening, whole body tense like a fiddle string. Helen stood too, heart racing. "What was that?" she asked. "Landslide," Theodore answered, voice hoarse. "Small still, but if it keeps raining—" He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Another rumble. Closer this time. The house shook harder. The lantern swayed, hanging from the ceiling. Helen grabbed the edge of the table. "Theodore," she whispered with real fear in her voice now. He turned to her. His eyes were wild, frightened, but when he saw the fear on her face, something changed. He took a deep breath, forcing calm. "Come here," he said, extending his hand. Helen went to him without hesitation. Theodore pulled her close, strong arms wrapping around her. Helen rested her face on his chest. and heard his heart beating fast under the damp shirt. "The house will hold," said Theodore with a firmer voice now. "The foundation is on solid rock. It won't happen like—" He stopped. Helen knew what he was going to say. Like it happened with the other house, with Amelia and Lily. They stayed embraced while the storm attacked outside. Theodore smelled of sweat, sawdust, and rain. Helen felt the heat of his body through his clothes, felt the strength of his arms holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world, and realized she didn't want to be anywhere else. Another rumble. The house trembled, but Theodore didn't let go. They held on to each other while the earth groaned and slid down below in the canyon, while the rain beat on the roof, while the wind tried to rip the walls down. She didn't know how much time passed, could have been minutes or hours. But eventually, the worst passed. The rain slowed to a drizzle. The wind tamed. The rumbles stopped. The silence that followed was almost deafening. Theodore loosened his arms slowly, but didn't let go of Helen completely. She lifted her head to look at him. Their faces were very close. Helen could feel his breath on her face, saw every detail of his brown eyes, saw the little gold flecks she had never noticed before. "Helen," whispered Theodore. His voice came out ragged, loaded with emotion. He stopped, swallowed hard, started again. "I can't pretend any more. Not after today, not after feeling how terrified I was of losing you." Helen's heart beat so hard she was sure he could hear it. Theodore lifted his hand and touched her face with infinite care, as if afraid she might vanish. "You brought life back to this house, brought light, brought a reason for me to wake up in the morning wanting to live the day, not just survive it. And I am falling in love with you. Maybe been in love a long time and just didn't have the courage to admit it." Helen felt tears burn her eyes, not tears of sadness, of relief, of joy, of something big and frightening being born inside her chest. "Me too," she whispered. "Don't know when it started, but it's here, in my heart. You." Theodore closed his eyes as if her words were absolution for ancient sins. When he opened them again, there was decision in them. "Can I kiss you?" he asked quietly. Helen nodded without being able to speak. Theodore leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind, but she didn't. His lips touched hers with a softness that contradicted the strength of his body. A long, tender kiss, full of promises. Helen felt the world disappear. Only the two of them existed, the heat, the connection, the certainty that she had found home, not in the walls, but in this man. When they separated, Theodore rested his forehead on hers. "I'm going to marry you for real," he said, "with a preacher, with a party, with a ring. I want you to be my wife, not just on paper, but in heart. Do you accept?" Helen smiled with tears running down now. I accept everything. You, this house, this life. I accept." They kissed again, deeper this time. Years of loneliness on both sides dissolving in that touch. When they finally separated, both were breathless. Theodore ran his thumb over Helen's face, wiping the tears. "Never thought I'd feel this again," he confessed. "Love, hope, fear of losing something precious. You made me live again, Helen." "And you gave me a place to belong," she replied. "Family, purpose, future." They slept that night each in their own room still, because Theodore was a man of principles and wanted to do things right. But before parting, they stood long minutes in the doorway of Helen's room, hands interlaced, low words of affection exchanged, light kisses stolen. When they finally said goodnight, both knew something fundamental had changed between them. The next morning dawned clean. The sky was washed, intense blue without a cloud. The air smelled of wet earth and new leaves. Birds sang, celebrating the end of the storm. Helen woke with a feeling of lightness she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't a dream. Theodore had said he loved her. had asked her to marry him for real. She left her room and found Theodore already awake making coffee. He turned when he heard her, and the smile that opened on his face made her heart melt. "Morning, my love," he said, testing the words. Helen felt heat rise to her cheeks, but smiled back. "Good morning." They drank coffee together with light conversation and looks that spoke more than words. Then Theodore got serious. "Need to check the damage from the slide. Want to come with me?" Helen agreed. For the first time since she arrived, she went to the edge of the gorge with Theodore. He held her hand firmly as they approached. The ground was wet and slippery. Helen could see where large chunks of earth had given way during the night. Whole trees had fallen into the canyon. The path of destruction was visible on the side of the cliff. But the area where the house stood, the rock foundation Theodore had chosen carefully, was intact, solid, safe. "Look," said Theodore, pointing. "The rock here is different, harder. That's why I built here." He looked at Helen. "The old house was there," pointed to an empty area about 50 feet forward, closer to the edge. "The ground there is dirt over stone. When it soaks, it slides. I knew that when I rebuilt. That's why I chose this spot." Helen understood. Theodore's stubbornness wasn't irrational, it was calculated. He hadn't built on top of his family's grave out of madness. He had built as close as possible while being safe. It was his way of honoring the dead without killing himself in the process. They stood there on the edge, looking at the gorge together. Helen squeezed his hand. "You know what I think," she said slowly. "I think it's time for you to make a real memorial for Amelia and Lily. Something beautiful. And then we can think about building a new house, not here, in a place closer to town, where our children can play without us being afraid of them falling." Theodore went very quiet. Helen feared she had said too much, poked a wound she shouldn't have. But then he squeezed her hand back. "Our children," he repeated with a wondrous voice. "You think about having children with me?" Helen turned to look at him. "I do, if God wills it. A real family." She hesitated. "I know Lily and Amelia will always be in your heart, and I don't want to take their place, but maybe there's room for a new family too. New love that doesn't erase the old one, but grows beside it." Theodore pulled her into a strong hug. "You are a wise woman, Helen Vance. And you're right. It's time I stopped living in the past, make a proper memorial, and build a future with you, in a place where our children will grow up safe and happy." They walked back to the house, holding hands. Theodore went to work in the shop, but came back to the house every hour just to see Helen, steal a quick kiss, exchange a loving word. Helen floated through the house chores, hummed while washing clothes, smiled while cooking. The world had brighter colors. 3 days later, on a sunny afternoon, they heard the sound of a horse arriving. It wasn't Mrs. Euler's wagon. It was a single horse. Theodore went out to see who it was and tensed up. Alaric Drummond dismounted with a serious expression. "Heard there was a big slide here during the storm," he said without preamble. "Came to check if everything is all right, and offer my help if needed." Theodore crossed his arms. "Everything is fine. The house held firm. Don't need help." Alaric looked around, eyes evaluating the visible damage on the landscape. "Theodore, be sensible. This will happen again. Next big storm could be worse. You have a wife now, have responsibility. My offer is up to 2,500. Accept it and go live in peace far from here." Theodore took a step forward. "Already said I'm not selling, and you know why. You don't want this land, you want the creek, and I won't let you dry up the water the families down below need." Alaric lost the mask of kindness. His face went hard. "You are stubborn and a fool, Theodore, and you will regret it. There are ways to get what I want without buying your miserable land." Helen stepped out onto the porch at that moment. She had heard everything from the window, stood beside Theodore, shoulder touching his. My husband already said he doesn't want to sell, she said with a firm voice. I suggest you respect his decision and leave. Alaric looked at her with contempt. You're a teacher, aren't you? Educated woman. Should have some sense. Don't let this hard-headed man drag you into tragedy. If you are following along this far, click that subscribe button so you don't miss the next stories. It makes all the difference to me. Helen lifted her chin. My husband is a man of honor, something you clearly do not understand. Now leave our property. Alaric mounted his horse with barely contained rage. You will regret this, he spat the words. Rode off at a gallop, kicking up dust. Theodore turned to Helen with an expression of admiration and something more. You defended me, Helen smiled. Of course I defended you. We're family now, and family protects each other. Theodore pulled her for a kiss, right there on the porch, under the afternoon sun, not caring if anyone saw. When they separated, he said with a voice hoarse with emotion, I'm speaking to Father William tomorrow, setting the wedding as soon as possible. Can't stand calling you fiancée anymore. Want to call you wife. Helen agreed with an overflowing heart. The next day, they went to town together. Father William was radiant with the news. They set the wedding for 2 weeks later. The priest insisted on having a small party afterwards at the church. Mrs. Euler offered to make the sweets and organize everything. The news spread through the village. Some people turned up their noses, but most were genuinely happy. Theodore was respected, even if misunderstood, and Helen was earning respect for having stayed. The 2 weeks passed in preparation. Helen sewed a simple but beautiful dress with fabric Mrs. Euler had given, white with lace at the collar and cuffs. Theodore ordered simple silver rings from a silversmith in the neighboring town. They cleaned the house from top to bottom, made plans for the future. The night before the wedding, sitting on the porch under the stars, Theodore spoke about an idea that was maturing. Been thinking on what you said, about building a new house, and I think you're right. We can sell some furniture I made, save money, buy better land, closer to town, make a memorial here for Amelia and Lily, but build our life somewhere else. Helen held his hand. Are you sure? I don't want you to feel you're abandoning them. Theodore shook his head. It's not abandoning. It's letting go. It's understanding that honoring the dead doesn't mean staying trapped with them. They would want me to be happy. And I am happy with you, Helen. Happier than I deserve to be. Helen rested her head on his shoulder. Then let's do it. Together. One step at a time. The wedding happened on a clear October morning. The small church was fuller than Helen expected. Half the town came. Mrs. Euler was in the front row, crying with joy. Father William conducted the ceremony with a beautiful sermon about love that heals wounds and hope that is reborn. When Theodore placed the ring on Helen's finger, his hand trembled. When Helen did the same, her eyes were wet. When the priest said they could kiss, Theodore pulled Helen for a soft, tender kiss that drew sighs and applause from the small congregation. The party at the church was simple but joyful. There was corn cake, coconut candy, dulce de leche, strong coffee. People ate, laughed, wished them happiness. Theodore didn't let go of Helen's hand. She shone beside him, face illuminated with happiness. When afternoon fell, they returned home, for their first day as husband and wife for real. Theodore carried Helen over the threshold, a tradition he insisted on keeping. She laughed, arms around his neck. He put her back on the floor slowly, but didn't move away. Finally, I can call you my wife, he said with a voice thick with emotion. Mrs. Helen Alder. Helen smiled with good tears in her eyes. And I can call you my husband, and my love, and my home. That night, for the first time, they shared the same room, the same bed. Theodore was gentle and careful. Helen was brave and affectionate. And when they fell asleep entwined, both knew they had found where they belonged. The following months brought changes. Theodore began working on a memorial project for Amelia and Lily. A small garden in the area where the old house had stood, with a wooden cross carved by his own hands, and a stone bench where he could sit and remember. When it was ready, Helen planted flowers around it, white and yellow roses that bloomed in spring. Helen began teaching the village children, first informally in her own house. Then Father William got a small room next to the church. 5 students became 10. 10 became 15. Helen was making a difference again. And this time, no one could take that away from her. Theodore expanded the workshop. Orders increased when people saw he was more present, happier, more open. He started saving money for new land, looked for options closer to town. Alaric Drummond tried once more to apply pressure, went to the county seat in the Springs to try and get an eviction order claiming Theodore's property was unsafe. But Father William, who had contacts, found out, mobilized the town, raised money to hire a lawyer. The lawyer showed the property was safe, that the accusations were unfounded, that Alaric had economic interest in the area. The case was dismissed. Alaric, furious and publicly humiliated, finally gave up, sold his own lands a few months later, and moved to Denver. The town breathed a sigh of relief. 6 months after the wedding, Helen discovered she was expecting a baby, told Theodore one night after dinner. He was speechless. Then picked her up and spun her around, laughing and crying at the same time. "A son," he repeated in wonder. "We're going to have a son." The pregnancy was smooth. Helen continued teaching until the 7th month. Mrs. Euler became a second mother, teaching her everything about childbirth and baby care. Theodore became super protective, wouldn't let her do anything heavy, finished work in the shop and ran home to ensure she was okay. In June of 1913, on a night of full moon, Helen went into labor. Mrs. Euler came with the midwife. Theodore stayed outside the room, pacing from one side to the other, praying, sweating with nervousness. When he heard the baby cry, he fell to his knees, thanking God. It was a boy, strong and healthy, powerful lungs, dark hair like his father. Theodore entered the room, afraid to break his son just by looking. Helen, exhausted but radiant, placed the baby in his arms. "Look what we made," she whispered. "Look at our miracle." Theodore looked at his son with reverence. A tear rolled down his face. "Let's call him Gabriel," he said hoarsely, "because he is a gift from God." Helen agreed. Gabriel Alder, our boy. Life adjusted to the rhythm of a baby. Sleepless nights, diapers, nursing, but also laughter. First smiles, crying that turned to sleep. The immense love that flooded everything. When Gabriel turned 6 months, Theodore finally found the perfect land. 50 acres just 2 miles from town. Flat, safe, with a small creek running in the corner. Fair price. They bought it. Started building a new house, bigger than the old one, with 3 bedrooms, wide living room, large kitchen, a porch all the way around, proper workshop out back. The move happened when Gabriel was 1 year old. A sunny spring day in 1914. Friends from town helped. Father William blessed the new house. Mrs. Euler prepared a feast, the house filled with laughter, food, music. Before closing the old house for good, Theodore and Helen went there one last time, walked through the empty rooms, remembered the moments lived there, the initial fear, the discovery of love, the storms faced together. "Thank you," said Theodore to the empty walls, "for protecting me when I needed it, for bringing Helen to me, for being a bridge between my past and my future. But now it is time to move on." Helen held his hand. They walked out together, locked the door, left the key hanging on a nail on the porch in case some traveler needed temporary shelter, and went to the new house, to a new life, to the future they were building together. 3 years later, in 1917, Gabriel had a little sister. They called her Lucy, because that was exactly what she brought. More light, more joy, more love. The new house had a garden Helen tended with care, had a vegetable patch that provided greens, had an organized chicken coop, had Theodore's workshop always full of orders, had a makeshift classroom where Helen taught the alphabet and numbers to the village children. Theodore never forgot Amelia and Lily, visited the memorial regularly, told Gabriel and Lucy about the big sister they never met and the mother their father loved before, but spoke without pain, spoke with the fondness of good memories, and always finished thanking them because that past love had prepared him to recognize and value the present love. Helen never forgot the house on the edge of the gorge. Sometimes, when passing the old road going to town, she looked up and saw the structure still standing, resisting time, and thanked that place that had been the stage of their transformation, the place where she had found the courage to stay when everyone had fled, the place where two lonely hearts had learned to beat together. On a warm summer afternoon in 1920, Helen was on the porch of the new house rocking Lucy, who had just turned 3. Gabriel, 7 years old already, played in the yard with a mutt dog they had adopted. Theodore arrived from the shop and sat beside her in the rocking chair he had made himself, looked at his wife, at his daughter sleeping in her lap, at his son running free and happy, at the house full of life, and said quietly, "Sometimes I still can't believe this is all real, that I got this life, this family, this peace." Helen looked at him with deep and true love that only grew with the years. "It is real, and we deserve it, both of us, because we didn't give up, because we had the courage to stay when it was easier to run, because we believed there was light at the end of the tunnel, even when we only saw darkness." Theodore took her hand, silver ring shining in the afternoon sun. "You were my light, Helen. In the darkest moment of my life you appeared, and stayed, and taught me it's worth living again. I love you, today, tomorrow, always." Helen smiled, eyes shining. "And I love you, today, tomorrow, always." The sun began to dip, painting the sky orange and pink. The older family stayed there on the porch together while the day died and the night arrived softly. There were no more abysses. There was no more fear. There was only love and future, and the certainty that they had found in each other the only home that truly mattered. 3 women had fled upon seeing the house, but Helen had stayed, and by staying she had gained not just a husband, she had gained a life, family, purpose, love that healed old wounds and created new hopes. And in the end, she discovered that a true home was never made of walls. It was always made of courage, of choice, and of the heart of someone willing to hold your hand and say, "Stay." We build this together, and they built, brick by brick, day after day, love after love, a life that was worth every moment of fear faced, every storm survived, every step taken toward the light. Because in the end, love always wins, always is worth it, always transforms, and always builds homes where before there was only loneliness.